Welcome you all. In this video, the topic is Java Spring Dependency Injection IoC with Autowired Annotation. The Spring is one of the popular frameworks in Java which had its core on dependency injection and inversion of control. The counterpart of this framework is the Spring Boot, or we can say the Spring Boot is a framework which can have multiple frameworks inside, which also includes the Spring framework in that. We have to understand where we have to go to the Spring framework and where we have to go to the Spring Boot framework. And we need to understand the difference between these two before getting into this. As I already said, the Spring framework is having the core part on dependency injection and IoC. Similarly, the Spring Boot framework actually having its core part on configuring the classes based on the form.xml dependencies. And also, while speaking about the form.xml, in the Spring framework, we will add the dependencies with the version control and the counterpart Spring Boot framework. The dependencies will be added without the version there. So it will pick the suitable version on its own. And also, the Spring Boot framework is little heavier on the side because it is also having internal database. It is frameworks of frameworks, and also it can do the auto configuration for the classes. It is also having internal servers to run the application as well. Spring supports the Spring MVC pattern, and Spring Boots will support with the RESTful applications. When we want to go for the bigger applications with much more support and auto configurations, we can go for the Spring Boot one. And when we want to go for the lighter frameworks and quicker running with the lesser features, we can go for the Spring. And we can also integrate Spring with the Spring Boot framework. That is also possible. And now we will get into the Spring dependency injection and IoC. We have to understand what is dependency injection and IoC. When you think about something like the website which is displaying you the cricket scores, in that website you can able to see the particular part only being getting updated, the batsman score, and rest of the pages, the advertisement or the rest of the information in the page will remain constant. So how the particular part in a page is getting updated in the runtime? Will someone have to modify the code in the runtime and rehosting the website every time? No. If that is being happened, then that is the worst possible way which we could able to do that. So the code should not be touched, and what we host should not be modified. At the same time, the data need to modified in the website. That means in the runtime, only the data which is required to modified should be picked from somewhere else. What is the place somewhere else? That place is the XML file. From that XML file, the dependent value will be picked for the Java object. And with that value, Java object will start to display the things. This is achieved with the help of dependency injection. Then what is IoC? Inversion of control. Let me understand in detail about the IoC. Let me to create two class files here. One, I will have it as employee.java, and the other one I will have it as address.java. I will open this in the editor to work with. Now let me have the first one, employee.java. Just I will create public class employee, and inside that let me to have some of the fields like int id for the employee, and then just I will have another field. The address for the employee is nothing but address class and the address field. Let me to have one more field, string name. So every employee is having ID, name, and address. In fact, address is an object of another class. It will have some set of fields in it. What are the fields? Address fields. Address class will have, we will go to the address class and we will have some public class address. Here the fields can be like string, street, and then city. These two are the address fields I'm having it here. And this address fields can be picked by the address object. Now, I need to give the values for these ID, name, and address. How could I able to give the value? Let me to have a constructor here. In this constructor, I will assign the value. Suppose if I'm having a constructor like public employee is a constructor, and inside this constructor, I'm going to assign the value like ID equal to 10. We can also use this dot ID if there is two reference for the ID, local variable and the global variable, but there is only one ID. So that directly I'm using ID equal to 10, and then name equal to my name, and then address equal to new address, and I'm passing the values for the address, that is the city Vijayawada. So this constructor I can have it in the address field as well. It's a constructor. Here I can say I can retrieve two values. I can just say this dot street equal to the local variable street. This dot city equal to local variable city. Now the constructor is ready in the address class, and when you go to the employee class here, the constructor is creating the new memory in the heap, and the heap memory is going to have the values as KLU Road and Vijayawada as the address value. Now, when you do in this way, this is not the dependency injection and in IoC. Like this is not the inversion of control. Okay. For example, what will happen now? Na? I will explain you the stack and the heap memory with this, and you could able to understand what will happen. See, in the stack memory, there are three fields ID equal to 10, and then name equal to my name, and then one more reference called address. These are in the stack memory. Okay. Since it is a stack, I can say 0, 1, 2, like that. The top of the stack is address. And there is heap memory in another location. Let me have in this location. So in this heap memory, the address reference value, that means the address variable, that reference is here, and it is referred to the memory in the heap, the actual value. So here it will have city, street equal to KLU road, and city equal to like this. Okay. All these stack values, okay, ID, name, and address are actually associated with the object, the object of employee class. Okay. Let me have the employee object, that is E1. Okay. E1 is the employee object. When you create E1, the employee class constructor will run. At that moment, okay, at that moment, these three values will get initialized. These three values will get initialized. Now, when you delete this employee E1, what will happen? Normally, the ID value, the name value, and the address value will be initialized when you create the employee E1. And address will have the reference for case 6, that means the heap memory, which is pointing to this location actually, case 6. Okay. And address will have a pointer to this location, and that will have street and city. Now, when you create the E1, it is creating all the three values. When you delete the E1, what will happen means E1 will delete the associated values. So the associated values will be ID 10, name, and address K6, and also it will delete the values inside the K6. Values inside the K6, because you are creating the memory, heap memory, which is inside the constructor of employee. That means you are creating this heap memory which is inside the object E1. Whenever you delete E1, the address object will be deleted, and then the associated memory will be lost. So this need to be avoided. That means I want to make a loosely coupled architecture for my application so that I can increase and decrease the virtual machine or instance according to the load. Okay. Now, how to make it loosely coupled? Here, I don't want to give these values. The 10 and name value is been fine, but I don't want to give the dependent value of address directly by assigning the memory here. What I can do, I can receive the address value, the address object, and I can assign that address object to the class address value. Now what will happen? The memory is created somewhere else and it is passed to here, to the constructor, and from that constructor it is been assigned to the address. So this now becomes a dependency injection as well as IoC, inversion of control. Exactly this concept is IoC, inversion of control. Now what will happen when you create E1, these things will be created: ID, name, and address. Address pointer will be created, but address heap will be created before the creation of this E1 object. Now also the pointer K6, like the address pointer will point to the K6 memory, and somewhere else the address will be created with the same reference K6. This address is actually pointed to the employee E1 object and it has been assigned here. And this is pointing to the heap. Now, when you delete E1, it will delete the ID, it will delete the name, it will delete the address which is local to the class, but it won't delete this address reference and the heap memory. These two will remain same. Okay. Only you will be deleting the pointer, you won't delete the heap as well. Okay. Because the memory allocation is happened somewhere else and you are passing the value to the stack. This concept is nothing but IoC, inversion of control. I hope so you have understood the IoC concept now. Now we will close this, we'll get back to our PPT. I explained one scenario for dependency injection, like with the cricket scores and the IoC with the employee and the address. Now we will get into the implementation of this with the following files. We will create one new Maven project and we will introduce the Spring dependency to that in the pom.xml, and then we will go with the packages like, that means we will go with the classes like two entity classes, employee and address, as we just created, and one more main class for the dependency injection. In this main class only we will create the object for employee and we will inject the dependency from the XML file, and the actual value will be retrieved from this XML file, application context.xml. The name can be different as well, but logically I had kept it as application context.xml. So the actual value, the bean value means I'm saying it, the object value. The object may have number of fields and those fields value will be available in the application context.xml. This will be passed as a dependency injection to the corresponding object in the runtime on the main file. The objects are nothing but employee entity class and address entity class objects will be handled. So let me create one now. Just open the Eclipse and go to File, New, and then the Maven project. Just select the Maven as Maven R-type quick start. Maven R-type quick start. Then select the 1.41. Just give the name for your project, JFSD underscore Spring. The project is getting created in Eclipse. If it is asking any option to provide yes, just provide yes. So now the project is created JFSD underscore Spring. Now we have to convert this Maven project as the Spring based one. It requires some dependencies, and that dependencies you have to add in form.xml under the dependencies tag. So here you have to add it. So let me add the dependency now. You can able to see the dependency here, which is a Spring context dependency. This dependency also you can get from Maven repository. Maven repository. In this Maven repository, just give Spring context. You can able to see the first one, Spring framework, Spring context. Click that and get the latest one. And this dependency, you just copy it and go to the code and paste it. After pasting, don't forget to save and update the project. Then only the dependencies will get into impact. So now I had saved. I will update that Maven project once. I had updated. Now we will create the entity classes which is required. I will create one class called employee. So in this employee class, they need to have the fields like ID, name, and then address. Actually, the address field requires address class. You will create that. Create one more class called address. In this address class, have two fields, street and city. You should also have the setter getter methods for this. In fact, we can make the dependency injection in three ways. Actually, three ways, but the third way is depend on the first and second one only. I would say the three ways. One is the setter way, setter and getter way. Another one is the constructor way. Another one is the interface way. Okay. The interface way also requires the setter and the constructor's help to do that. Not constructor, setter. Okay. The interface way also requires the setter method to help to implement that. Let me go with the getter and setter now. And also with the constructors. That is the empty constructor I'm speaking about. Just have one default constructor. And then the employee class also have one default constructor. Then the setter and getter method for these fields. Now the class is being ready. Okay. Form.xml ready. Two entity classes are ready. Now we have to go to our main class. In this class, we have to bring in the XML file which is having the actual value. Then we have to inject the bean inside the XML file, which is inside the XML file, to the object for the classes which we are going to create here. Now, first we had created the entity classes. That means Pojo classes. That is fine. In fact, I have to say it as a Pojo class here. Entity class in the sense it will connect to the database. We'll say employee Pojo class and address Pojo class. And also we are only going with the field ID, name, and address. Okay. Now my Pojo class is ready. The main class I have to work, but before that I have to fill the other side, the actual value, the XML. Where you have to create, that means outside of the package. That means under src main Java, just click on new and then file, write it as application context dot xml. Now the XML file is created. You have to use the XML tag and the bean tag opening and closing here. That you can get it from my PPT. The XML and the beans tag you have to make it as a default one, and inside this beans tag you can create multiple bean tag. Okay, every bean tag can be given as a dependency injection to a particular object. You can assume this bean is an object value. Now I will create my first bean tag. The bean will have ID to refer. I can say emp1. This bean is for the first employee, and then the associated class you have to say with the package name com.klu.jfsd underscore spring dot class name. The class name should have first letter capital. Then the closing bean tag. See, the beans tag is having the bean tag inside. Give the bean tag. There are two ways to push the dependency. One, setter way, the property way. That means the setter or property way. That is the one. Two, the constructor way. First, we will focus on the setter, the property way. We will write here property. The property name is ID. There are three properties in the object, and we have to give the value for all the three. ID is 10. Then second one, property name is name itself, and then value is my name. The third one, you want the address. Here if you say property as address, and what value you will write here? Will you write the street and city value together? No. Actually, the value should be the reference. So don't write value here. Before that, you create one more bean for the address. Here you can say just the bean value as address1, class as form.klu.jfsd spring dot address class. Close the bean for that. Inside this bean, we are having two property. Can we set the property of this address with the constructor injection? So it will be covering two things. In that manner, if you want to inject the things with the constructor based way, in the address, you have to create one more constructor with both street and city. Just go to the source and generate constructor using fields, tick all and generate. You can now able to see one new constructor is created with the street and city value. We will use this constructor value here in the application context.xml. If you are going with the constructor based way, just you have to say constructor R, and inside that you have to say value. You may be wondering, I am not saying the name. Directly we can say the value and type of that, it will pick the things. So value for the first one, that is street. Okay. Street can be KLU road I am giving. And second constructor of value can be Vijayawada. This is the second value. See, if it is a string, it is not mandatory to give the type as string. If it is something like integer, you have to give the type as int here. If it is a string, it is not mandatory to give the type as string, but you can. For the first one, the street is a string, which I'm not giving it. For the second one, the city is also string, but here the type equal to string I had specified. So it is an optional one. But for the integer, you have to specify it mandatorily, because by default, it will take the string as a data type. Now, the dependency for address object is being done. I will use that address object as a third field value here with a keyword called ref equal to, that means a reference equal to the ID value of the first bean, add 1, address 1. You should not write value equal to, here it is a reference because it is set of values. So reference equal to, ref equal to, add 1 I'm giving. So now both the beans are ready. We have to use this EMP1 bean, which is internally having the address bean in it. So how to use the EMP1 bean? You have to go to the main class. Here, first you have to create application context object as context, then new class path XML application context. Inside that, you have to specify the application context file name. Application context.xml. Now, the context object is ready with the data which are inside this application context.xml file. This application context.xml file is actually having number of beans, and those beans can be accessed with this context object. Now, second line, we have to create the object for the employee. So I'm creating object for employee E1. Normally, while creating the object, we will use something like new employee. And then we will use E1.setter method to set the values. But this is a different approach while you are speaking about the Spring dependency injection, which is going to happen in the runtime. So don't allocate the memory directly like this. Instead of that, you can just say context dot. You can retrieve the bean, get bean, the bean name you have to say. That means the ID which you are given for that bean there. If you go to your application context, you could able to see the bean ID as EMP1. So this EMP1, you have to say it here. Now, whatever you are retrieving, that need to be typecasted to employee class type. Then that can be assigned to E1. Now, the E1 value in the runtime will be something 10 and my name and this address 1. That means KLU Road and Vijayawada. Now I want to check this. How to check this? You have to just print it. I'm trying to print E1. Suppose if I'm trying to print E1, E1 will give me the hexadecimal address value of this object. That means in the stack, E1 will be stored, right? So that stack memory, that box will have some address. That address value I will be getting. If you want to get the actual values of E1 fields, you have to override the toString method so that it will give you the actual values. I will override the toString method in the employee class. Here, I'll just write one function, public string. There is a method called toString. It needs to be override actually. In this toString method, I'm just returning the one which I need. What I need? ID value I need. Then some space in between. Then I need the name value. Actually, this name is actually having capital N. We need to follow the same naming conversion all over. Name plus, that means concatenating, and then the address value. Now, the address is also the object which will return the hexadecimal address value. So I have to overwrite the address as well with the toString method. ToString is a function. Here I will return the street concatenated with cityware. So whenever I'm trying to print the object of address, I will get this street-city value instead of that hexadecimal value. Now in the employee, it is ID, name, and the address will be substituted with the street and city value. Now remember we are having the name N in the capital. So in the application context.xml, the name field N should be capital. Now the E1 may print all the field values which we are having. Just we will try to run this and see whether it is happening or not in the runtime. Run as Java application. Right click the main file and run as Java application. Here you could able to see that 10 and my name and the address values are all substituted and it is printed in the E1 object, which is substituted from application.context.xml file. So here whatever you are changing, for example 20, I said cricket batsman score can be changed. Like that in the XML file, I'm changing 20. And in the real time, when it is running, I will get the value as 20 here. And whatever we had done in the employee with the address and string, name, and ID, these values are substituted in the runtime with the dependency injection mechanism. That is the core of the Spring. Now, we need to go with auto wiring as well. Suppose I'm not giving this property value here. I'm not giving this property value here. Only ID and name I'm substituting. The address is separately being there as a separate bean, but that is not mapped with the EMP1 bean. Now what will happen when you run this? So what is your guess? Will I get KLU Road and Vijayawada in the E1 object? Let me check it. See, I'm getting only 20 and then my name and then null because address is not been assigned. So I'm not going to write anything here in the property on application context.xml, but I need that address 1 to be mapped to the EMP1 automatically. How it is possible? Automatically, I want this add one bean to be mapped with EMP1 without writing any code here. So that is possible with the auto-wired annotation. You can do auto-wiring in 3 places. One, in the address Pojo class, you can do the auto-wiring. Sorry, in the employee Pojo class, you can do the auto-wiring above the field auto-wired. Okay, above the field, this is the first place. And second, you can do this auto-wiring above the setter method of address. That means while setting the address value, it will be auto-wired. Third, you can do this auto-wiring with the constructor parameters. Okay, the constructor is having 2-3 parameters, then exactly above the parameter or beside the parameter address, you can use this auto-wired. So 3 places I can use. Let me to use in one of the place, that is the setter method. Okay. Now, let me to try to run once again to see what is happening now. Just I had added the auto-wired annotation above the setter method of address. Now I am running the Java application. Once again, it is giving me the null value. Let me to check it now. Actually, one more thing we had missed. See, in the employee Pojo class, we have returned the auto-wired. That has been good. But in the application context.xml, actually the Spring need to identify the auto-wiring is there and we have to substitute the value. It will identify only if you mention one more value here. That is the context tag. Context colon annotation hyphen config. It is a self-closing tag, so you can close in that itself. When you do this, this context prefix is actually coming from here, this XML-NS namespace. This context prefix is supported by this namespace. And from this namespace support, we are writing context colon annotation hyphen config. This will make the Spring to identify there is some annotation called auto-wired somewhere and we have to substitute the value. So let me try to run once again. We will save all and you'll run. Now you could able to see the auto-wired annotation actually picks the address add1 object and substituted the value. You are actually injecting only the emp1 bean, which is only having the value for twin id and name, and there is no value for the address. Address object is separately, that means address bean is separately created. Okay, but it is not mapped to the emp1, which is mapped in runtime by this auto-wired annotation. Suppose you may have a doubt. Here, if there is a 2 bean, that means 2 address value, which address value it will map? I'm having the second address, add2, and here KLU wrote 2, and here I will have Hyderabad. So now, there are 2 address beans which are possible to map with the emp1. Now which bean will be mapped in the auto wiring? You haven't specified anything. What is your guess? What is your guess? Let me try to run and see whether your guess is right or wrong. Guess na? Shall we go? We will go. You are actually getting the error. There is no qualifying bean. This is the keyword. There is no qualifying bean for the address. So it is expecting the qualifier. There is 2 beans. You have to say which is the default one. That you are going to say in the employee class just after the auto-wired annotation. You can use the qualifier annotation. Inside that, you can give the name, which is the default one. Default one, I can say address 2. Now address 2 is the default one, which will picked when there is number of beans are there. Now in the app.java, we will try to run once again. Now we could able to see the second bean is picked as a default one and the address is assigned to employee. You can able to see still emp1 is not mapped with any address in the runtime because of the auto wiring. It is picking the bean, and because of the qualifier, it is picking the second bean. I hope so you had understood these concepts with the Spring Dependency Injection and IoC. Includes the auto-wired annotation and qualifier annotation. We had actually gone to inject 2 different data types that we can say it as primitive and non-primitive. Primitive one is something like direct value assignment. ID is the primitive one. And when you speak about the string name, it is also a non-primitive one because it is having set of characters. It's a character array. And when you speak about the address, it is also non-primitive because address is an object which will have set of field values. So we tried and injected the primitive and non-primitive data types through dependency injection, and we executed the program as well. We'll get back to our PPT. While speaking about the main file, we used this method of application context class, and we created the context object. And with that context object, we brought in the beans to inject. There is one more method where you can use this resource and bean factory class for doing your job. That method is also possible. You can try it later. If you are using the first method, then second one is not required. Then the dependencies we can take from the Maven repository itself, as we took in the video now, and we had injected the dependency in the form.xml. Don't forget to update the project after saving the dependency. Then only it will have an effect over the project. From this dependency only, you are actually importing this application context class. Without the Spring context dependency, it is not possible to do Spring dependency injection. And thank you all.